What if I told you that we're not alone on this planet? And I don't mean visitors from distant stars who've only recently arrived. I'm talking about something far more unsettling. Intelligences that may have been here long before us. Tonight, we're diving deep, literally, into two of the most fascinating yet overlooked cases that suggest our oceans and lakes may harbour secrets we're only beginning to understand. These aren't the cases everyone talks about. These are the encounters that slipped through the cracks, documented but forgotten, witnessed but dismissed. Until now. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to discover mysteries that have been hiding in plain sight. October 11th, 1973, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Most people know the basics of this case. Two shipyard workers, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, claimed they were abducted while fishing on the Pascagoula River. But what most people don't know is what happened before the abduction, and what the local community had been witnessing for years. Let me take you back to that October evening. Charles Hickson, age 42, and his 19-year-old co-worker Calvin Parker decided to do some evening fishing at an old pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River. It was around 7 p.m. The sun was setting. The water was calm. Then they heard it. A strange whirring sound, zipping through the air. Both men turned to see a craft, blue and glowing, hovering just above the water, about 10 feet from where they stood. Hickson later described it as oval-shaped, about 8 feet across, and making a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard. But here's what makes this case extraordinary, and what connects it to our underwater theme. The craft didn't descend from the sky. According to both witnesses, it emerged from the river itself. Hickson specifically stated in multiple interviews that the object rose up from beneath the water's surface, water streaming off its hull, before it positioned itself at the pier. This wasn't a craft landing. This was something surfacing. What happened next has been told many times. 3 beings emerged from the craft. Hickson described them as having grey, wrinkled skin, claw-like hands, and no discernible eyes or mouths. The men claimed they were taken aboard, examined, and then returned to the pier. Calvin Parker was so terrified he fainted. Hickson remained conscious throughout, paralyzed but aware. When they were released, the craft descended back into the water and vanished beneath the river's surface. Now, here's where this story gets really interesting. The 2 men were so shaken they initially considered not reporting it at all. But eventually, they went to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder interviewed them separately and together. The officers were skeptical, naturally, so they did something clever. They left Hickson and Parker alone in a room, telling them they were stepping out, but they left a tape recorder running. What that recording captured convinced the officers these men were genuine. Parker was crying, hyperventilating, praying. Hickson was trying to calm him down, saying things like, "They won't believe us, Calvin, but we've got to tell somebody." There was no discussion of getting their story straight. No rehearsing details. Just 2 genuinely traumatized men trying to process what happened. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer and UFO researcher for the US Air Force, personally investigated this case. He interviewed both men extensively. His conclusion? There was no question in my mind that these men had a very terrifying experience. But now let me tell you what doesn't get discussed. The part that was buried in local newspaper archives and witness testimonies that were never widely publicized. In the weeks and months leading up to October 11th, there were dozens of reports from fishermen and residents along the Pascagoula River of strange lights beneath the water. One fisherman, whose account was published in the local paper but never made it to the national coverage, reported seeing a glowing object the size of a car moving beneath his boat. It paced him for nearly 10 minutes before descending into deeper water. He described the water above it as boiling, even though the object never broke the surface. A family living near the river reported their young son came running inside one evening, terrified, claiming he'd seen a submarine with windows sitting on the river bottom in a shallow area. When his father went to investigate with a flashlight, he saw ripples and disturbances in the water, but whatever had been there was gone. Multiple shrimpers reported equipment malfunctions when working certain areas of the river. Compasses spinning wildly, radios filling with static, and strange sonar returns showing large moving objects where the water should have been empty. After the Hickson-Parker incident became public, more witnesses came forward. A couple who'd been driving along the river that same night reported seeing a bright blue light rise from the water near the old pier, exactly where Hickson and Parker had been fishing. They thought it was some kind of flare or emergency signal and almost stopped. But the light moved so strangely they became frightened and drove away. Another fisherman, who came forward only after hearing Hickson's description of the craft emerging from the water, reported that 3 days before the abduction, he'd seen something large create a wake in the river. But when he looked, there was no boat. Just a disturbance moving upstream, against the current, beneath the surface. Now, the Pascagoula River connects to the Mississippi Sound, which opens into the Gulf of Mexico. The area where Hickson and Parker were fishing is deep enough for a large vessel to navigate. And the Gulf itself. It contains underwater canyons, trenches, and vast, unexplored regions. Charles Hickson passed away in 2011, but until his final days, he never wavered from his account. He gave the same story for 38 years. He took multiple polygraph tests. He passed them all. Calvin Parker was so traumatized by the experience that he disappeared from public life for decades. He suffered from anxiety and PTSD-like symptoms. It wasn't until 2018, 45 years later, that he finally wrote a book about his experience. And in that book, he provided additional details he'd been too frightened to share before. One of those details. During the examination aboard the craft, he caught glimpses through a window or portal. And what he saw was water. They were underwater. The craft had submerged after taking them. Think about the implications here. This wasn't a craft that came from the sky, abducted 2 men, and flew away. This was something that had been in the river, possibly for some time, given all the prior sightings. Something that used the waterways as its base of operations. The US Navy has extensive operations in the Gulf of Mexico. Training exercises, underwater testing facilities. And according to Freedom of Information Act requests filed by researchers, There were unusual sonar contacts reported in the Gulf around this same time period. Contacts that were logged but never explained. Was the Pascagoula River being used as a hidden access point? A route from deeper waters into areas where these visitors could observe human activity undetected? The case was investigated by local law enforcement, the US Air Force, and independent researchers. Nobody could debunk it. Nobody could explain it. And to this day, it remains one of the most credible close encounter cases on record. But it's the underwater element that makes it truly fascinating. Because it suggests these intelligences aren't just visiting. They're living here, in our waters, hidden in plain sight. (1977) Colares Island, Brazil. A small fishing community in the Amazon River Delta. Remote, isolated, and about to become the site of one of the most intense and well-documented UFO waves in history. What makes this case absolutely extraordinary isn't just the number of witnesses, though there were hundreds. It's not just the physical evidence, though victims bore strange marks and burns. What makes this case undeniable is that the Brazilian military investigated it thoroughly, and their report confirms everything. Let me set the scene. Colares is a small island community where most people make their living from fishing. The island is surrounded by rivers, tributaries, and the vast Atlantic Ocean. In the late 1970s, it had limited electricity, no television, and was largely cut off from the modern world. Beginning in the summer of 1977, residents began reporting strange lights over the water. At first, people thought they were helicopters or aircraft, but these lights moved in ways no aircraft could. They hovered motionless. They accelerated instantly. They dove beneath the water and re-emerged. Then the attacks began. In October 1977, the situation escalated dramatically. People reported being struck by beams of light from these objects. Thin, focused beams, like lasers, that would target individuals. The effects were immediate and terrifying. Victims describe feeling intense heat, paralysis, weakness. Many collapsed where they stood. Some lost consciousness. But the physical evidence was even more disturbing. Dr. Welaide Kekim Carvalho, the only physician on the island, treated approximately 80 victims during this period. She documented everything. The victims had small puncture wounds, usually 2 holes close together, that appeared to have been made by something extracting blood. The surrounding skin showed burns consistent with intense heat. Many victims suffered from anemia, fatigue, and headaches that lasted for weeks. Some victims reported that the lights came while they were sleeping. They would wake to see a beam of light coming through their window or roof, pinning them to their beds. Unable to move, unable to scream, watching as something probed or examined them. The locals began calling the objects chupa chupa, which roughly translates to sucker sucker, because they believed the lights were literally sucking blood from victims. The fear became so intense that people began sleeping in groups. They would light bonfires and stay awake through the night. Men organized night watches, armed with whatever they had to protect their families. And still, the lights kept coming. By November, the situation had become a crisis. The mayor of Colares sent desperate requests to the Brazilian government for help. People were fleeing the island. The local economy was collapsing. Fear had taken over the entire community. Finally, the military responded. On November 1977, the Brazilian Air Force launched Operation Prato. Operation Plate, named after the disc-shaped objects people were reporting. Captain Oirange Hollander was assigned to lead the investigation. He arrived with a team of military personnel, photographers, and equipment. Their mission was to document and explain what was happening on Colares. What happened next is documented in an official military report that contains over 500 pages, 16 hours of film footage, 300 photographs, and detailed witness testimonies. Captain Hollander and his team witnessed the objects themselves. Night after night, they observed and photographed disc-shaped craft, cylindrical objects, and balls of light emerging from and descending into the water. In his official report, Hollander described one incident where his team tracked an object on radar coming from the direction of the Atlantic. The object approached Colares, hovered over the water near the shore, and then slowly descended beneath the surface. The radar contact didn't disappear. It remained detectable underwater, moving along the river bottom. On another occasion, the team filmed an object hovering above the Baía do Sol. As they watched through telephoto lenses, the craft descended straight down into the water. A massive splash, waves radiating outward, and then nothing. The object was gone, submerged. The team documented at least 7 separate incidents of objects entering or emerging from the water. They photographed strange lights beneath the surface, glowing shapes moving through the dark water of the Amazon tributaries. Fishermen guided them to locations where they'd seen objects submerge. In several of these locations, the water was disturbed, warmer than surrounding areas, and electronic equipment malfunctioned. Captain Hollander interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Fishermen reported that their boats had been paced by underwater lights. Some described seeing craft sitting on the river bottom in shallow areas, visible through the clear water. One fisherman claimed he'd seen beings, humanoid figures in tight-fitting suits, working near a submerged object. The military investigation continued for months. Operation Prato collected an enormous amount of data. And then, suddenly, in January 1978, the operation was shut down. Captain Hollander was ordered to close the investigation and submit his final report. The report was classified. The photographs and films were seized, and Hollander was told never to discuss the case publicly. For 20 years, Operation Prato remained one of Brazil's most closely guarded secrets. But in 1997, Captain Hollander, now retired, decided to break his silence. In a series of interviews with Brazilian UFO researchers, he revealed everything. He confirmed that the objects were real, that they had been documented extensively by military equipment, and that they appeared to be using the waterways of the Amazon Delta as operational bases. The lights emerged from beneath the water, he stated clearly. They would rise up, perform maneuvers in the air, and then descend back into the rivers or ocean. This happened repeatedly. We documented it. He described how his team had come to believe they were observing some kind of underwater facility. The objects always appeared from the same general areas. They seemed to have preferred routes and territories. and they reacted to the military presence, sometimes approaching the team's position, as if they were aware of being observed. Hollander also revealed something chilling. He and his team had been instructed to maintain a certain distance from the objects, never to approach aggressively, never to attempt interference. These orders came from high up the chain of command. Why? What did the military leadership know that they weren't sharing? 3 months after giving these interviews, in October 1997, Captain Hollander was found dead. The official cause of death was ruled self-termination by hanging. But many who knew him found this impossible to believe. He had been in good spirits. He was planning more interviews. He wanted the full story of Operation Prato released to the public. His death remains controversial to this day. In 2004, under Brazil's Freedom of Information Act, the Brazilian government was forced to declassify portions of the Operation Prato files. What was released confirmed everything Hollander had said. Hundreds of pages documenting legitimate military investigations into unknown aerial and underwater phenomena. Photographs showing disc-shaped objects. Lights over water. Technical analyses that found no conventional explanation. But here's what makes the Collars case particularly relevant to our underwater hypothesis. The Amazon River Delta is one of the most complex aquatic systems on Earth. Thousands of tributaries, river channels that shift with the seasons, vast areas of water that are barely charted. The water is often turbid, murky, making underwater observation nearly impossible. It would be the perfect location for an underwater base. Fresh water access, connection to the Atlantic Ocean, minimal human infrastructure in 1977, and the ability to move undetected through a labyrinth of waterways. Dr. Wellide Carvalho, the physician who treated the victims, has also spoken publicly about her experiences. She stands by her documentation. She witnessed the burns. She saw the puncture wounds. She treated people who were genuinely injured by something unknown. "I don't know what they were," she said in an interview. "But they were real, and they came from the water." Today, the people of Colares still talk about 1977. They call it the year of the Chupa Chupa. Older residents remember the fear. Some still refuse to go out at night. And fishermen occasionally report strange lights beneath the water, though most keep quiet about it. Operation Prato stands as one of the most thorough military investigations of unexplained phenomena ever conducted. And its conclusion? The objects were real. They were documented. They interacted with the water. And they remain unidentified. Two cases. Two very different locations. One in the American South. One in the Brazilian Amazon. But notice the patterns. Objects emerging from water. Objects descending into water. Waterways being used as routes or bases. Military documentation confirming unusual underwater activity. And most importantly, objects that seemed to belong in the water as much as in the air. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker on the Pascagoula River. Two working men fishing. No reason to lie. Nothing to gain but ridicule. And yet, they reported a craft rising from the river, taking them and descending back beneath the surface. Operation Prato in Colares. An official military investigation. 500 pages of reports, hundreds of photographs, multiple military personnel confirming objects routinely entering and leaving the water. These aren't famous cases. They didn't become blockbuster documentaries or spawn major investigations. But they're documented, they're credible, and they point to something we've been missing. For decades, we've looked up. We've scanned the skies. We've built arrays to listen for signals from distant stars. We've sent probes to other planets searching for any sign of life. Meanwhile, something has been here all along. In our rivers, in our oceans, in the vast unexplored depths that cover most of our planet. Think about it logically. If you wanted to establish a presence on Earth, where would you set up? On land, where humans have satellites, cameras, and observers everywhere. Or underwater, where we've explored less than 5% of the ocean, where the pressure alone keeps us from reaching the deepest regions, where you could operate for years without detection. The evidence suggests we've had it backwards. They're not visiting. They're not just passing through. They're living here, operating here, using our waterways as highways and our ocean depths as bases. And perhaps they've been here far longer than we have. The question isn't whether there's something in the water. The question is, what happens when we finally develop the technology to explore every corner of our oceans? What will we find in the trenches, in the underwater caves, in the deep places we've never reached? And more importantly, when we finally shine a light into those dark depths, what will be looking back? Thank you for watching. If you found these forgotten cases compelling, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that history overlooked. And remember, the truth isn't always in the places everyone is looking. Sometimes, it's hiding where no one thinks to search. In the depths, waiting.